Hi everyone, Frank Carreri, Frank the Organic Tank Carreri, with our Mind of Master series. Today we're here, Mind of Robert Drysdale, BJJ legend, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu legend. In fact, the man who awarded me my Jiu-Jitsu black belt in 2010, which was one of the most emotional moments of my life. Surprised me on a Monday, which I would venture to say that probably 99.9% of all black belts that are given for some reason on a Saturday in a ceremonial. So really threw me a curveball there. I was speechless. For those not familiar with Robert Drysdale's credentials, they're among the best in the history of the sport. 6-time world champion, Abu Dhabi absolute world champion, undefeated MMA fighter. His businesses have done very well. I mean, I think he has maybe somewhere in the vicinity of 50 or so, 150 affiliate schools around the world, which is an incredible, mind-blowing number. And when you think he's really only been at this academy thing for maybe 6 years, it's an incredible number. Does seminars the world over. Without further ado, privileged to interview you, Robert. Let's talk first about tapping. I always say when white belts come into the gym, I always say the most important thing they can learn is how do you tap, what's a good tap. The reason that's intriguing with you is I think I've trained under you for 6 years, and all the time I've trained under you, I think I only remember twice in the room when someone tapped you out. And it was like, literally like the sky had fallen and it's like the apocalypse. It's like just setting Robert on fire, just another level. Tell me, how many times do you remember being tapped in your own academy, and walk us through what's the mindset when someone taps you out?
Well, I guess there's two different kinds of tapping out, I guess. Like there's one times I'm goofing around and I'm playing with one of my blue belts and I'm trying new stuff and I'm just really being experimental, so to speak. I'm trying new things. I'm not trying necessarily to win, more I'm trying to be creative. And a lot of times in those roll-ins I get caught a lot. And then I'm not upset because I know I'm not doing my best. But when I'm doing my best, right? I'm not messing around. I'm actually trying to beat this guy, and he beats me. That infuriates me. I don't take that well. But
it's kind of nuclear. I mean, yeah. I've seen you where it's like I've seen your face.
It's not something I'm proud of, But it's I don't like to lose. It's just always been like that.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot when I say it reminds me. And by the way, I was like that when I was younger. I don't have Robert's pedigree and that level of championships, but I was very much, the younger me was very much that way. Dan Gable was that way, just really hating to lose. What your mindset on winning? Where did you get that from? I mean, because your parents, I think your mom was a swimmer in Brazil. She got that long bill, the big back to take in all that oxygen. Your dad just looks like a college professor or something. Doesn't look like an athlete of any sort. When I see your parents, I wonder how did you produce? How do you produce a Drysdale? I wouldn't see it in there. Not like a drill sergeant dad, or how did you wind up being so competitive like that?
I think I got my mom's drive and passion, my dad's brain. That's how I look at it. I've always been competitive from a young age, man. The thing what fired it, really, the thing what triggered it was the fact that when I was a kid, I was such a horrible athlete, man. Because I was fiercely competitive since a child, Like I was the kind of kid where if you played Monopoly with me and I was losing, I'd just flip the board, Like I couldn't take it. And I fell in love with soccer as a child. I tried mountain biking when I was a kid. I tried all sorts of sports and I sucked at every single one of them. I was just a horrible athlete. I was just uncoordinated, just couldn't keep up with the kids, But like that, I think it created a theme in the back of my mind where I expected more of myself and I expected to excel at something. I think certainly created from a young age, I created an expectation for myself to be good at something. I didn't know what it was, but there was an expectation there to be good at something.
Now, jiu-jitsu is interesting because I had an old saying, build your game around your frame. And it is a sport where you can find a way, kind of like soccer. Soccer, you could be 6'4" from the Netherlands, and you could be 5'3" and find a way to, every sort of athlete body type can make a way in soccer. And you feel like jiu-jitsu is like you say, I'm not a really athletic guy. Why were you able to have? Because we see guys like Jacare who went. We see some great athletes, Andre Galbo. You're saying you weren't. How were you able to have the success then?
I think that jiu-jitsu in a lot of ways is more of a brainiac sport. I compared, if you can make a comparison between the crowd. I had this gym, you know this, Frank. We have jiu-jitsu, crowd and how the MMA crowd. It would be not to be too general, but it would be the distinction between the nerds and the jocks. The nerds flock towards jiu-jitsu and the jocks flock towards MMA. I think it's because jiu-jitsu is such a brainiac sport. A lot of people don't get it. Like, the average meathead walks in the gym, puts his gi on, he gets triangled by the 16-year-old, he gets mad at the gi. It's the gi's fault. But blame the gi. Whereas like someone who's going to look at that and go, well, this is a puzzle. I have to figure this out. So there's a strategical and tactical, there's that puzzle element to jiu-jitsu that I think is not, I'm not saying it's missing in other sports, but I think it's more prevalent in jiu-jitsu. I think that's one reason why it's so popular. It's something that, being athletic certainly helps, but I think being intelligent, making your next move well is equally important. I've seen, like Jacques, for example, extremely athletic guy. But I know guys that have half his athletic ability that have beaten him before. So, and that if you have them in the conditioning room competing against each other, the guy that would be much better than that guy. But you put a gi on him, you put him under jiu-jitsu rules, the other guy's got a good shot at winning because it's such a brainiac sport. I like that about it. A lot of people dislike that factor. They like more the brawl. That's why some people they look at jiu-jitsu and go, I don't like that, but I really like MMA. And I get that. I have a passion for both sports.
Tough guyness gives you more mileage.
You get that, for example, that mindset where you go, the MMA guy goes, MMA requires you being tough. You have to be tough to fight. And it's true. Like, you have to be able to take a hit and keep going. And there's certainly that element that a lot of people in my jiu-jitsu class, for example, don't have. Like, I know a lot of black belts that just don't have that to them, and I get that. And my counter is, yes, jiu-jitsu requires a certain kind of intelligence that I don't think a lot of MMA fighters have. Like, it's that being able to figure out that puzzle. They go, oh, take the gi off, and this is stupid. That's kind of their attitude. Because they can't figure it out.
The solution is always to punch you in the face.
I'll punch you in the face. That's their attitude towards everything. Every time they get confronted with a new situation, they go, oh, I'll just punch you in the face. And really, if that's your strategy, then why bother even training? It's just, I think it's a intellectually lazy way of looking at things. You get that a lot. And I think that, that side of jiu-jitsu certainly, I think, is exciting. I like the strategical side. A lot of people get angry at it because of the point system. It's all about submissions, and I agree with that. But I think that a lot of people, that's their excuse over the fact that they can't figure out the puzzle. It is a puzzle, right? And they're not figuring it out. So instead of going, okay, I got to try harder, they go, oh, blame the rules. Oh, blame the sport. Oh, blame the gi. Or, blame someone else. It's the blaming thing, right? And I can't stand that, man. Like, you're serious about getting better, you blame yourself. That's my whole take on improving. You're serious about getting better. You're serious about improving anything you do in your life. You don't blame the world. You don't blame this or that. You blame yourself. Even if you're responsible for 1%, that's the 1% you're responsible for. And that's where you put your focus, if you're serious about improving. If not, you're not serious about improving. You're just you're worried about what other people are going to think about you, and that's not going to take you anywhere.
When you were a white belt, let's go back to your white belt. How old were you, 17? How old were you when you...
16.
Okay, so 16-year-old Robert Drysdale, real scrawny kid. Were you a natural, or were you getting beat a lot in those early days? What do you remember about being a white belt? Did you hit the ground running and you're trying?
I remember falling in love with the sport right off the bat. Like my first class, it wasn't like, oh, I know this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. It wasn't anything like that. But it was one of those things where I knew I was going to be practicing jiu-jitsu for a long time. Like, I fell in love with it right off the bat. I knew I was looking for something. I knew I was. In fact, I've probably been looking for something my whole life. And when my first jiu-jitsu class, I felt that I had found it. Like, this is what I've been looking for. So it was special.
What was the aha moment for you where you knew, you know what, I got a chance to be the best in the world. I got a chance to beat everybody. Were you a purple belt? Where were you in your progression when you what was it that made it?
It was a progression. There's no decisive moment where you just kind of oh, now I'm gonna do this for a living. But I remember one time I was doing fairly well with my training partners back in my hometown in E2, and I just moved back from Brazil. I moved back from Las Vegas to Brazil, and I was doing really well with guys that used to beat me back in the day. And I improved a lot when I moved to Las Vegas as a teenager. So when I went back, I was doing really well. And my best friend in Brazil, Paulo, he said, Rob, you should compete the World Championships. Because at that moment, no one in my hometown had even gone. No one had even given it a shot. No one stood a chance. Where I grew up, there was no one really good at jiu-jitsu. Like, I mean, the good guys are all in Rio de Janeiro and Manaus, some in São Paulo, but jiu-jitsu was still very young in São Paulo. There's nothing in my hometown. So when he said,
You,
man,
you were close to Sao Paulo. You were like a
yeah,
small
like an
town.
hour, yeah, out,
Okay.
about an hour outside São
Okay.
Paulo. So like there was no one in my area who would even compete at the world championship. So when he said, man, you should go, you got a good shot. Like to me, that was like, whoa, you really think so? You know. And to me, that was like, I remember that was one thing that got me thinking, yeah, man, I should go. Maybe I'd do well, you know. I remember one time winning the state championship as a purple belt. I just moved to
In
Brazil,
Brazil,
around the same
hard,
time.
hard to win a state title in Brazil.
Yes,
Very hard to win, yeah.
it was a big deal because I had just moved from Las Vegas to Brazil, and no one knew who I was, and I didn't know anyone either. So I went in my weight class. I took third. I was really upset because I didn't win. And then I went on to compete the Open, and I went in there with a kind of like, you know, screw it mentality. Let's see what happens. I'm just going to go out there and let loose. And I really lost my division. I didn't have huge expectations, but I was very relaxed and very calm and very focused at the same time. It was a special. You don't get in that zone very often. Like it's very difficult to get your mind to that flawless zone where you just know what you want. You know what you got to do, but you don't feel pressure at the same time. You just feel, you know, it's like a special place. It's very difficult to get. I've been in that place like a few times in my life, and I remember that being that, you know, in that open division. That would have been 2001, and I won my division, and I beat some really good guys that day. And, it was like a really like big deal. And I remember my instructor at the time, Paulo. He was he told me like, Rob, that's a big deal, man. You can call yourself the best purple belt in the state of São Paulo. To me, that meant the world. That was like my world title right there. To me, that was like, man, I'm on my way to doing something great, something important, something that's significant, at least to me. That was that. I mean, maybe that was one moment, one of the moments that marked me. Like, man, I can maybe do something.
And you were how old at that time? 20 years old. So let's go, because it's interesting. You're a product. Your dad's from Utah, and your mom is from Brazil. You've lived part of your existence in America, and you were also raised a lot of your formative years in Brazil. So you are the product of both cultures. Which do you identify more closely with either culture?
You know, I used to say I am more, you know, when I first moved here, I get asked that question a lot, and I say I feel more Brazilian because I'd spent most of my life in Brazil. But now if you do the math, it's about 50-50. And you would expect me to say I'm Brazilian and American. What I try to do is I try to gather the things that, you know, I like about cultures. And I travel the world too, so even aspects of other cultures that I like, I try to absorb, you know, and I don't consider myself really this or that. You know, there are things that I absolutely love about Brazil, you know, and there are things that I don't like.
Such as what do you love about Brazil?
You know, ironically, a lot of people within the jiu-jitsu community, at least, they give Brazilians a hard time for a number of reasons. I think the best thing about Brazil are the Brazilian people. A lot of people probably don't agree with me, but they're really,
very warm people.
Yeah,
Unless
very
you get on the
warm
wrong
people.
side of them, they're extremely
Yeah,
warm people.
I understand the complaints that people, you know, some of the reservations people in the Anglo world have against Brazilians. There's a cultural shock.
Not
and I get that.
as much organization, maybe.
It's
trains don't
organization,
run on
it's the
time as much.
time, it's the doing business. Like I get it, and I've seen it. So I get but I would say that's not the average Brazilian. The average jiu-jitsu practitioner that comes to teach jiu-jitsu in the United States or Europe is not the average Brazilian. I'll tell you that right now. That's not the average Brazilian. The average Brazilian is the kind of person, if you meet him right now, you know, they'll invite you over for lunch at his house. And if you show up the next day again uninvited, it's not a big deal. Like, they're very warm people. It's difficult to explain. They're always happy. They're very happy people. Very happy people. Like, they don't need to be in a certain place and drinking to have a good time. You get a group of guys and they're going to have a blast, you know, and then they know how to have fun. They're really fun people to be around.
Now, Americans are, if you look at, like, Americans almost feel like winning is their birthright, right? We're nobody can outdo us.
There's a positive
And I was getting ready to say, so we're like, winning is our birthright, you know, everybody has read Sun Tzu's, you know, The Art of War, and we have the best resources and facilities anywhere. We just expect to win. And is your mindset more of an American mindset in that regard? Do you feel like, I mean, that,
you know, like, I don't know, because like even in Brazil as a child, I remember being, you know, having that winning thing on my mind. But like I do see that more in the United States than I see in Brazil. Like, I think a lot of it has to do with because the U.S. is such a dominant culture worldwide, that it's so instilled in the culture that what we do is better, the way we do it is better. So, yes, this is the dominant way of doing whatever it is that you're doing. But I don't know if that influenced me in any way, man. It's hard to say.
Let's talk about, because you had your own academy in Brazil at one point. You took in a lot of the poor kids, as is fairly common in Brazil. In America, people will say the mats are my home. The mats feel like home, and they mean that figuratively.
Yeah.
In Brazil, somebody might say the mats are my home.
They sleep on the mats,
and they literally sleep on the mats.
Yeah.
You've been in the favelas there, the poorest areas up in the mountains. How does that impact you? Because you have a different look at jiu-jitsu. You've seen jiu-jitsu here in America. You have a paying customer, and you have a whole expectation system around that, and they have jobs. In Brazil, it's like you're basically raising kids. It's like you're like a foster dad.
It's very different, man. Like I think that U.S. has that business mindset. Like if it's not making money, then it's not. It has to be making money. If it's not making money, it's almost like it's the highest priority in life is to be financially successful. And I'm not denying that the importance of that. Like I work for money too. I don't want to work for free. But it's less of an element in Brazilian culture. I mean, obviously, Brazil is a country with huge resources, and it doesn't have a quarter of the money there's in the United States. And, so it's a country with huge potential, but it doesn't have that same business mindset the Americans have. There's a good and a bad side to that. Like that, for example, most gyms wouldn't consider having 50 kids, from the favelas training in the gym because that would harm their business. Oh, I don't want my paying customers to mingle with the kids who can't offer anything because I don't get anything from that. Whereas in Brazil, that's completely common. Like it's very, very common.
And it might be your best students, in fact, too.
A very common thing. They all some of the best, kids. You know what is the one reason why jiu-jitsu has a lot of good practitioners? I think it's less. A lot of people think it's a social thing. I think it's more of a cultural thing where it's completely acceptable to be 25 and living with your parents and training full time. First, because unemployment's so high. So it's not like you got a whole bunch of options anyway.
You're just like
very
else.
few people
you're just
are
like
school. So I mean, what do? I mean, you go to the gym. At least you're doing something, and your parents are happy. Well, at least he's busy. He's not doing drugs. So there's a lot of support in that sense. Whereas over here, like if you're 18, 19, your parents are kind of like, all right, on your own. And then if you got a full-time job, you can't train, obviously.
Yeah. So. Now I came to train with Robert in, I think it was somewhere around the beginning of 2009. And he had his 3,000 or so square foot facility here in Vegas. A lot of really good guys, UFC fighters, world champion caliber jiu-jitsu players in that gym. Unfortunately, wasn't doing that well business-wise. I remember you telling me maybe a year and a half, like, man, times were tough. And now, how were you able to weather that storm as a businessman? Let's talk about a business side. How were you able? Because you went from being on the cusp, maybe like, oh man, don't know, it's hard to keep the doors open. Even though you had a lot of talent in the room, you didn't have Joe Schmo, the average Joe who really keeps the lights on. And then, boom, you turn the corner, and now you're prospering. It's that make or break point that a lot of people face in business. You were able to survive and then thrive. How'd you do it?
Well, first of all, I had a lot of help. Like I wasn't, when I first moved here, I literally had like about $200 in my wallet, and I had some jiu-jitsu credentials, and I was eager to work and teach and train and fight. It was I was hungry when I moved here, and like things were really slow in Brazil. But I had a lot of people helping me. You met Sean, and I met, my father helped me a lot, and my mother always helping me in Brazil. So it wasn't something I did on my own. But in any case, it wasn't easy. I remember for the first 3 years, I didn't make a penny in this job. I was pretty much, I remember like I come over and I teach a seminar, and that money I'd hand over to who as his salary, and I didn't make a dime for 3 years. People don't believe me when I say this, but I can prove it. I did not have a paycheck for the first 3 years this place was open. I was teaching for free, but I knew eventually we were going to turn it around, and eventually we did. And it was a learning process because even my teaching mindset was still the Brazilian way. Whereas hard training is good training, whereas over here, it's a little, people like structure, they like methodology. So when I first moved here, people went, Rob, what's your curriculum? And I had no idea what they were talking about. Like, I had no idea. What do you mean a curriculum? Like, no one in Brazil has ever heard of a curriculum. It's like, your curriculum, like, what are the things you're teaching in class? And to me, like, it was like a puzzling question. Like, what do you mean? I didn't get it. I literally had to have someone show me a curriculum from there. Oh, that's what you're talking about. I'm like, oh, okay. That's what people want. That's what people expect over here.
Yeah.
Whereas in Brazil, if you show up with that, people are going to look at you like, what the? We don't need that, bro. We'll just get on the mats and train. It's a very different mindset in that regard. So I had to make a lot of adjustments. And I remember Amar he was teaching class.
Amar Burbles.
Yeah, Burbles. He was like, you struggling to keep people in the gym. And he's like, Rob, he would call me and he'd go, Rob, it's such good training. It's such good training. I don't know why they don't stay. And I'm like, describe training. Oh, man, it's so good. We start 6 p.m. We go all the way to 9 p.m. We do about 8-10-minute rounds every day. I'm like, stop. That's not for everyone, man. There's like, no wonder you got, X amount of students. It's one of those things where like doing like 10% of the population can train like that.
Yeah.
And
so having to adapt to the mind of the American consumer.
The kids class here in Brazil is very different. Like, I think that, and this is not so much critique, it's more of an observation. American parents put a lot of pressure on their kids, a lot. There might be a good side to that. You can, argue the merits, but there's a lot of pressure on kids. In Brazil,
do the parents coach harder? Because you hear, I know you had to even say like,
I'm not
please
saying
don't coach as much.
it's not all parents, but if you're a gym owner, you've probably been through this before. But I think there are a lot of parents that walk in here expecting something of their kids. Like, you're going to train. It's not because I want you entertained. It's not because I want to teach you something new. It's not because I want you to have fun or socialize. It's because you're going to be a UFC champion. It's almost like the parent's dream, that is being reflected on the child now. So you got 8-year-old little Johnny who's supposed to be the next UFC champion because daddy wanted that. And, so you get a lot of that. Like in Brazil, I never got that. Mm-hmm. I never got that. Like, parents would drop their kids off and pick them up. And I wasn't even thinking. In fact, if you asked a parent, like, hey, would you want your son to be a professional fighter? Now it might be different because the UFC blew up in Brazil, but it would have been like, the answer would, of course not. Like, that's the worst job in the world. Why would you want to do that? Mm-hmm. It was a very different mindset in that regard. And then, there might be a good side of putting pressure on kids. You don't want kids on, in front of TV all day. But that's an element it took me a while to get used to too. Like, I didn't understand like why parents were so involved in the program. And now I get it. I'm very Americanized in that regard, so I understand where it comes from and I know how to deal with it. But at first, it was a bit of a shock.
Now, I've known you for 6 years or so. We've had many conversations. You're a pretty well-read guy. You're just basically, you think a lot like an academic. I mean, your dad was a teacher, I believe, right? I mean, your dad was a teacher.
He still is, yeah.
Yeah, and you have that teacher or that professor, that professorial demeanor and everything. As I understand it, you're a guy, you read a lot of like Noam Chomsky and talk about. I mean, are you still a Noam Chomsky kind of fan and reading?
I think I read him the first time I was in maybe high school, and
yeah,
and I was reading all sorts of people. And,
the neurolinguist.
I'm trying to, and I can't really. I'm not. I mean, you read someone and you find things you agree with and disagree with, and some people make more sense than others.
What are some of the books you've read that you really enjoyed that you would tell people, hey, because you're a guy, you sit around, you like to read books, you like to play. Unfortunately, he does like to play video games, like this is
occasionally
total stereotype. But you do like a good book, and you read some pretty heavy stuff. What are some of the books you've read and that you talk about those books a little bit?
I read a lot of stuff, man. I mean, I don't specialize in anything. I like to read a little bit of everything and try to understand a little bit of everything. I hate when a topic comes on either on TV or on the internet or talking or whatever, and I know nothing about it. That kind of bugs me. Like if someone says something about anything, it could be about given philosophy or whatever, and I don't know anything about it, and that bugs me. So I feel like I have to read something on that guy to understand it a little bit. I've always liked to read. I mean, if you ask me to recommend something, like my favorite book of all time, I always recommend this one to people because it had a huge impact on me. I read it years ago, and it's called Listen, Little Man by Wilhelm Reich. The little man is the man who refuses to think for himself. He lets other people do the thinking for him. That's the little man. And like once I probably read that book like 6 times. Once you finish reading, you go, anything in my life except that, except the little man. The little man is the man who just will not think for himself. He's just intellectually lazy. He exercises his body every day, but never exercises his mind. I like that book.
You've got a lot of fire and intensity. You've got a championship mindset. It's paid off for you. You've got a very good team here in Las Vegas, a lot of really good guys in the room. How do you take what's in you as a teacher and transfer it to your students? How do you do that?
I don't know, man. Like I enjoy teaching. It always came naturally. Like when I first started training, I wanted to be a teacher. I never expected to compete or win tournaments or fight MMA. That expectation came later. Originally, it's like, oh man, I can be a really good teacher, because I always assumed that I could have been. I mean, because my parents are teachers, I don't know, but I always liked to teach. And maybe sometimes I'm a little too hard on my students. I expect a little too much of them. Like you got people in here with full-time jobs and kids, and I'm expecting them to compete on the weekend, and I can be really hard on them sometimes. But I think it's for the better. I think that when you create high expectations for people, they excel. They do better when you raise a bar. And I try to do that in here. Within limits, of course. You're running the business. You don't want to scare people off and have them quit jiu-jitsu because it's becoming too uncomfortable. But I've literally lost students before because they straight out told me it's too hard. Your classes are too hard, But I try to lead by example. Like, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I'm in the gym every day. Like, you're going to walk in, or if I'm not trained, it's because I'm not in town. I'm out teaching a seminar. If I'm in Vegas, I might be sick, injured, it doesn't matter. It's probably one of my probably my best quality as an athlete is the fact that throughout the last 17 years I've been training, I've been very, very consistent with training. Like I've never, I'm gonna take time off. Like I don't take time off. I just don't. Like I was here Sunday. I was working on my own. I enjoy working out. I like training. So it's not an effort. And I think that I try to, maybe it's not something I do consciously, but I think my students see that and they go, it's leading by example. If I expect my students to train hard, I think I gotta be the ones training the hardest.
What motivated the 20-year-old Robert Drysdale, and what's motivating the 34-year-old, 33? 33-year-old Robert Drysdale? Has anything changed in terms of motivation?
What? I think I love jiu-jitsu even more than when I first started, man. Like I don't think my passion for the sport has changed. You get a little, you become a little more cynical about jiu-jitsu, and there's so much nonsense in the jiu-jitsu world today. Like even MMA as well. Like I'm watching them. I can't stand the trash talking. It's like, you're gonna reward them? It's the opposite. I think martial arts ought to teach you humility. Put your head down and train hard. And what we're doing is we're rewarding people who trash talk and incredibly arrogant. It's just not a good role model for anyone. I'm not saying I'm perfect.
In my mind, and I want to know what you think, but I see more of that in MMA than jiu-jitsu. Still has more of a humble code. I see.
Yes,
or
but
it's
changed a lot. The internet has made jiu-jitsu a lot worse.
Okay.
I've made that case before. I think the internet has ruined jiu-jitsu in so many ways. I love the fact that I can go on YouTube and learn. Like I get that. Like that I like. The fact that knowledge is widespread. Whereas before, when I started training, it was like, oh, this is secret knowledge. You can't. There was a lot of that when I started training.
Yeah.
This is before YouTube. So, like, people would tell you, I had instructors of mine who would tell me, don't share this, don't teach this to anyone, this is yours, keep it to yourself, don't teach anyone. Now, the internet made that all obsolete. You go on, you have a subscription website, you can sign up.
People are disappointed in you now if you don't
share.
I think that's a great thing. You'll lose your customer.
The downside was there's so much more vanity. It's like almost like vanity became a virtue and it's being rewarded. The more vain you are, the more you're rewarded versus being the more humble you are. It used to be like you had to, kill yourself on the mats and win tournaments, and then you would have like a little tiny reward at the end, And now it's like you go online and you brag about even the things you haven't done, and you do it enough, people will believe you because most people just don't care enough to go find out if it's true or not. And there's so many of that. Even I'm not going to mention names, but they're everywhere in jiu-jitsu. It's just. There's a lot of hoaxes out there, a lot of frauds, people who've never trained, but they talk the talk, and people believe them. They hang out with the right people. They take a photo with someone, they put it on the wall, and people believe them. Well, he's friends with so and so, so he must be good.
Right.
And my what I tell people, if your instructor or that person, first of all, if he's not training, that's a major sign. That's a major red flag. If he's not training on the mats, if you're 80 years old, it's a different story.
Right.
But I have people in here that are 60 something, and they're training every day.
Yeah. Maybe they're not training out, they're training regularly. Then
yeah. That's a major red flag. I don't appreciate the trash talking. I know it sells, and people want to see that, and it makes it exciting. But I just don't. I'm not interested by it. Like when people were talking about the Conor McGregor Aldo fight, and everyone was like so excited. It's like there's a part of me that didn't want to watch the fight just because of that. It's like it's just not. This is not what it's supposed to be, But it sells. I get it. It's a business, but it's unfortunate that people appreciate the trash talking more than they appreciate the skill. When I watch a fight, I want to see skills. I want to see the technique. That's what I'm looking at. But for some people, the soap opera aspect of it is more thrilling. I just don't think it is. When I see these guys talking, it's just like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just that you're not saying anything interesting. Yeah. What do I care?
It's interesting. People are actually more interested in all the talk than they are the actual fight.
Yeah,
you can have the two best fighters in the world fight, and we've seen that. And it won't register very well. But if you have two good talkers who aren't the best in the world, and
it will sell more. Yeah, and so it's almost like, it ranks higher than skill. You have skill, which is really hard to develop.
Yeah.
This is a lot of work to develop. And then you get someone who's very witty or charismatic or knows how to, talk trash, and they do better than the guy who's killed himself his whole life and is skilled. And you see a lot of that in the sport. I think that's really unfair if you think about it. Because we should be rewarding hard work.
Right.
But we're doing the opposite.
No, and I think, in my personal opinion, I think it's going to be worse in 10 years because of all the messaging to the kids and everything, seeing.
We're teaching them.
We're teaching them to be to peacock all the time.
I'll give you another example.
Humiliate your.
When I started training jiu-jitsu, there was this ethic inside the gym that you did not comment training. Some instructors still teach this. So what happens on the mat stays on the mat. So for example, if I tap you,
which has happened many times.
Yeah, but or vice versa. Like you don't go around, hey, so and so, I tap Frank Herrera in practice. You don't do that, right? Like that's not. You just keep it to yourself. You just don't brag like that. These days, I'm not going to mention names, but some of the best black belts in the world, they first of all, they film it, and then they go and put it on YouTube for the world to see. If they're winning, of course. If they're losing, they don't do that. Trust me, because I know when they lose,
the video doesn't make it.
No one's going to see that video.
The video gets trashed.
But when they win, they put it on YouTube. So in other words, it's not only that you're talking about training, what happened in training, you're filming it and you're putting it on YouTube for the world to see. And instead of everyone going, "That's an a-hole move," you don't do that. That's unethical. They go, "That's who I want to be like." And people look up to some of these guys. So, you see the next generation of white belts that are coming up, they're looking at these guys and going, "Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do." So you're right, it's going to get worse. It's like humility has gone out the window and vanity is on the rise. It's like the more vain you are, the easier life gets, Sad.
Two interesting stories that I remember you telling me. One was the story of the kid who loses his tooth, I think needs a root canal. Tell us that story about the kid. I mean, just to give you an idea of some of the kids in Brazil who don't have a plan B. There's no, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to be a chef, there's not a lot of plan B. To give you an idea of how important and central jiu-jitsu is to their life, here's Robert's story about it. Tell us that.
Those Paulo Miel. He's a highly accomplished kid. He won the world championship.
It was him.
Yeah, it was him. But he's got a twin brother, and they're both very talented. And one of them was teaching a seminar here last weekend.
Yep.
And so Paulo breaks a tooth during practice, right? He's rolling, someone knees him, the mouth, whatever, breaks a tooth. Tooth falls out, whatever, throws it in the corner, keeps training. So like a few days later, I think a dentist who trained at the gym walks up to him and goes, by the way, I heard this story from someone else.
Sure. It's still a good story. I had not heard the story. Right.
And then he walks up to him and goes, "Hey man, if you come over to my clinic, I'll take care of you, man. I'll fix your tooth for free. You don't have to worry about it. Just show up and I'll take care of you." Because this kid's like 19 years old. He's walking around without a tooth. When you're 19, the way you look is really important. As you get older, I don't give a shit. Especially once you get married or whatever, you just don't care. But when you're 19, the way you present yourself to women is extremely important. You really care about how your hair looks. And so this kid's walking around without a tooth. He just doesn't even mention it. And the dentist offers to take care of it for free. He's like, "Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that, man. I think that's awesome." And he goes, "Well, how many days off do I have to take?" And the dentist goes, "About 3-4 days off." And he goes, "No, thanks." So he's still walking around without a tooth because he refuses to take 3 days off.
Wow. And he's a world champion now.
So I admire that, man. I've had similar things, like similar situations where I'd refuse to do this or that because I didn't want to take a week off. But that's like an extreme case. I probably would have taken 3 days off to fix a tooth. But I admire.
Although I do see some chippage. I think there's been some chippage.
No, there are things that I won't. I've had similar situations where I just refuse to do whatever just because I would not take the time off. But I admire that, man. Like when I see that, I go, man, But see, that's what when you see something like that, and the kid doesn't trash talk, right? He's not arrogant. He's not bragging about what he's doing and not doing. Like those are the kind of people I admire. You know, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of discipline, sacrifice for the sport, but not a lot of bragging. But when people go around telling me that, you know, this happened one time at the gym. Like, the kid was walking in and out of the gym, and I go, "Aren't you going to train?" And he goes, "Oh no, I can't. I gotta go get a haircut." And I'm like, "You can't train because you're gonna go get a haircut?" And I go, "Okay, that's obvious where your priorities lie." And the same day, he goes on Facebook with a post about how hard he trains and how, you know, like these motivational stuff. I mean, when you read that, you go, like, these people can't be serious. Like, how do you sleep with your? I couldn't live with myself. I could never look at myself in the mirror and like, oh, I'm gonna put this huge motivational quote on Facebook about how hardcore I am, but I can't train today because I gotta go get a haircut. And I contrast that with Paul Lemieux, who's like, he refuses to fix a tooth because he doesn't want to take 3 days off. You know, unfortunately, the second kind ends up doing much better in life than the first kind. It's unfortunate, but I think people are very naive in the sense where, you know, again, they can't see past what, you know, I think actions speak louder than words. That's my point. But people still, I think that people fall for words more than they pay attention to actions.
Let's stay on another story that I find it heartbreaking, and I know the guy. So you have a black belt here, one of awesome world class black belt Rafael Domingos, and there's a story about him going back to. I mean, if you feel comfortable about it, there's a story about him in his childhood. That guy's come from just another guy who's just basically raised on the mats. And you look at what jiu-jitsu means to some people's life. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like his mom abandoned him when he was a child, man. Like I think he was the oldest of his siblings, and one day she just took off. He would have been like 8, 9 years old, and left him with a bunch of babies. And he's in a house. He doesn't know how to cook. He's got a bunch of screaming babies in the house, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he knew where his dad lived, but it was like a long walk. This is like 3 days later, apparently. I don't know the story, like exactly how it happened, but he left his little brothers at home and took off and went to find his dad, who, you know, he was a struggling individual. He had some issues himself, but he's the only person he had. And this is a very, very poor neighborhood in São Paulo. It's called Coabi. It's kind of like it's borders on a favela. Like it's pretty rough. It's a pretty rough neighborhood. So, you know, and then his dad helps him as best he can, but like he helped take care of his little brother, his little sister. I mean, given the area he grew up in, given circumstances, like he had every excuse in the world to go astray. Like he had every excuse in the world to go. I mean, you would expect a kid like growing up in that area under his conditions. I mean, if he ended up a crack kid, that wouldn't surprise you. If he ended up being a criminal, that would. I mean, that's the kind of route you take when these things happen. And yeah, like, he's one of the nicest individuals you'll ever meet. Like, I trust him with my kids. Like, I trust him with my classes here at the gym. I trust him with money. You know, he's a good individual. And, you know, I think jiu-jitsu saved him. You know, I think jiu-jitsu set him on the right track and did a lot for him. But, you know, you see this a lot, man. People with no opportunity to go on to do amazing things, and then some people are given everything, and they just keep messing up time after time after time again. You know, like Rafinha is a perfect example. Like he could have gone like way over there, and you know, probably people in his neighborhood are in jail right now. A lot of them, in fact. But you know, he chose to stay with jiu-jitsu and capoeira and whatever. And no, he's the kind of individual you could trust with anything.
He beat Gary Tonin, which was a huge win at IBJJF.
So it's funny, he had no idea who Gary Tonin was.
Yeah, he didn't know who Gary Tonin was.
He had no idea who he was. I'm like, he had just moved from Brazil. I'm like, Rafinha, all right, you got to do this, this, and that with that guy. He's like, okay. And like I'm just guiding him through a fight, and just like he's a very good listener. He's very easy to coach. And he goes and beat Gary Tonin in a no-gi match at the Worlds. And he's just like, and then after one, I was like, man, you beat Gary Tonin. I was like, who? Like, I have no idea who the guy is.
You have a condition with your chest, which, again, you tell us a little bit about that condition, and it was one of those things where I guess you're not supposed to have the cardio. You're not, you know, you talk about you weren't a really good natural athlete anyway, but then you also have that chest condition that you had that could have easily compromised. I mean, it's like a psychological barrier.
I don't know because I've never not had it. I've heard because I have a cousin.
What is it called, Rob?
There's a Latin name for it. It's victorious something. I don't even know.
You're not supposed to have good cardio. You're not.
Well, it hurts. It's supposed to. I know this because I have a cousin of mine, and he went through he had the same thing, and he went through surgery, and he said he feels much better practicing sports. So, I thought that maybe it does affect you in some way, but I've never not had it. I've had it since I was a child. I was born with it.
Yeah.
So I have no idea if it does affect me or not.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't know. But my
Right.
cousin tells me, he feels much better practicing sports. It's much easier to run and whatever. But
What is
that was the
your-
one thing, like, as you mentioned, like, I remember when I was probably 15, 16, no, would have been 16 because I already started training. My mom took me to the doctor. She asked me if I wanted to fix it. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's get it fixed. Let's do something about it. And the doctor told me I was going to take time off from jiu-jitsu. Like, can't do it.
So you are an MMA fighter. You won your first 7 fights. You're like the Ronda Rousey of at least you like that armbar too. You got a wicked armbar, which seems to work really well in MMA with the gloves and everything. It seems like the armbar is there even a little more. You got the finisher's mindset. What for you is the thrill of being locked in a cage with another guy? What's the thrill there?
It's funny. Like, I always avoided fighting. I never liked to fight when I was a kid. Always avoided it. I'm not a violent person. I hear all the time, violence solves everything. I think violence is the worst recipe for solving things. It just increases it. It just escalates. Like, I'm not in favor of violence in any way, but like, I don't think it's cool to punch someone in the face. I've never done that. Like, I've never. It's just not even in. It's not that I wouldn't in a fight. Of course, you have to, but I think what attracts me in MMA is more of the. It's more of it's the strategical side of it. It's the combat side of it. It's the hard work behind it. It's being in the gym and learning. It's the skill set that attracts me. It's not the. I see, like, I've watched the UFC with the crowd. Like, I'm listening to some of the things that these guys are saying. Like, and all I can say is that my approach to martial arts is very different from the average UFC fan. 'Cause for them, it's a bar fight, and that's cool. The more blood, the better. And I'm looking at one. You got two individuals, and one of them's trying to beat the other with skill, and brains, and strategy, and tactics. And he's using his tools to beat this other individual. And I appreciate that. I like that. To me, that's really exciting. Like, we're talking about me playing video games. I almost exclusively play strategy games. Like, I rarely play any game that's not strategical. Those are the games that that interest me. But I don't think it's not like, oh, I can't wait to knock that guy out and make him bleed. It's not.
Kind of like Damian Maia. Damian Maia said that. He said,
Ideally, I wouldn't hurt him at all. If I could finish him every time without hurting my opponent, I prefer. I think it's classier in a lot of ways. I think if you can beat someone without ever punching them, that shows it's a better display of skill, the way I look at it.
The inner voice that you have before a jiu-jitsu tournament, before going into the cage, what's that inner voice saying to you? What are you saying? Even when you don't think you're having a conversation with yourself, what's going on in there? What's the dialogue to yourself?
There's a lot of zoning out, man. When you're about to fight, there's a lot of, or getting ready, there's a lot of just staying in the zone and dealing with that anxiety. Like, I go through whatever I plan on doing in my head over and over. So, for example, if I have a given strategy and I know what my opponent is going to do to try to counter that strategy, I'm thinking about something to counter his counter. So I'm starting to think of all these different scenarios that might occur in a fight, and I go over that scenario a million times in my head. So, and that's something I've always done. Like, since I started training, I've always done that. I'd like lay in bed and I'd be thinking about jiu-jitsu for hours, just thinking over all those scenarios over and over and over and over. And when those situations occur, I don't want to see any hesitation. So I think that going through that in my mind helps a lot. It's one way of focusing as well. I try not to be, every now and then, this is very hard to do, but there's that negative doubt that comes, it's trying to haunt you, and it happens to everyone. From at least talking to other fighters, like, everyone admits that this happens to them. Like, that negative doubt comes over and starts haunting you, and he's trying to tell you, what if? And then you start seeing all these negative things happen to you. Like, what if the guy knocks me out? What if, he gets out of my arm or whatever? And what I try to do is I try to stop that negative process in my mind, and I try to reverse it into something positive. So if I see the guy, let's say he blocks one of my takedowns, I don't let him win that exchange. In my mind, I counter with something else, and I win at the end.
Right.
So at the end, I always have to be winning. I have to win. I have to win. A million times you have to win in your mind. Whereas a lot of times I think that, and I don't think it's just the universe conspiring to, like, oh, if you think positive things, like, I don't believe any of that. I think it's just more, if you think of your mind as a computer, it's programmed. And the program, because when you're in there, you're autopilot, and the program is going to react according to what you've previously programmed to do. So, for example, I had a student of mine, he would do exceptionally well in the gym, and he'd lose every time he compete. Like, I mean, if this guy took third, it was a miracle. Like, he just would not compete well, and we couldn't figure out, man, what is it that this guy can't figure out? Why can't he compete so well? So one day I sit down with him, and I asked him, like, dude, what's going on? What are you thinking before the match? Because at that time, I started becoming aware of, like visualization. And he told me, oh man, when I see myself, Rob, like this guy's taking me down, he's passing my guard, he's mounting me, he's arm barring me. Like the thought process was so negative the whole time in his mind that he couldn't, like when he went out there and he went autopilot, his mind is just reacting to the ways it thinks it's supposed to react. Because that neural pattern there of allowing the guy to take you down, for example, is there. Whereas if you keep stopping the guy from taking you down in your mind over and over and over, when that time comes, that split-second hesitation is not going to be there. That acceptance will be there. I think that helps a lot. Like, I've never been a huge fan of drilling. Like, I'm not against it. I see the importance, but it's just something I just never like to do. I'd rather roll. Yep. If I have an hour in the gym, I'd rather roll than drill.
You know what's interesting, and this is where I would say, and so you're so dominant that, this is the way that I would see it. You're so dominant that, like, if you and I rolled, that's basically equivalent to a drilling session for you, like, because you could just be like, look, I want to arm bar Frank. I just want to work my arm bar. It's like, yeah, you're getting you're drilling your arm bar.
Like one thing, like I've never been a huge fan of drilling, although I see the importance. But one thing that I always did, I don't think it was conscious or not, but whenever I went against someone that I knew I could be, someone said I was training with a white belt, a blue belt, that's exactly what I would do. I would use them as to practice new moves and try and be creative, like I was describing earlier. Just try new things, and because I know if I play my A game, I can beat them with the same move every time. But then I'm not really learning anything, so I would try new things. I would almost feel bad saying this, but I almost use like the white belt as a dummy. And until this day, if I'm going against someone I know I can control easily, I'm just experimenting, I'm trying new things, and I think that allowed me. Like, I'm not really great at anything. If you look at my game, I'm not really good at anything. I'm like well versed everywhere. Yeah. Like there's no major hole in my game. Well, some guys have huge holes in their game, but they excel at different things. They're exceptionally good at this or that. I think it's because I'm always, instead of doing the same thing over and over and over, the same thing my whole life, I've always experimented with different moves, and I can be reasonably dangerous almost anywhere.
Yeah, you and Evan Dunham, your games very much convert to MMA, to no-gi, to gi. There's just really not much of a different word.
And that's what I try to teach. Like, I don't think jiu-jitsu has to be gi or has to be MMA. I mean, I think it's possible to have a game that works everywhere. I've seen it. I've seen Damien do it. I've seen Tanquinho do it. I've seen Verdun do it. I've seen a lot of guys do it. And these guys have done well gi, no gi, and they're doing well in MMA. So it's possible. So why would I have a game that's only going to work in IBJJ, under IBJJF rules, or only have a game that's going to work MMA if I can have a game that's going to work everywhere?
Now, even just playing around, taking chances, experimenting, putting yourself in bad spots. The black belt, Robert Drysdale, have you been tapped by a blue belt ever?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm goofing around.
It wasn't just, hey, take my neck, whatever. But
I've never.
They legit caught you, even though you're working on something. Have you ever legit?
Yeah. Like if I'm trying, like there was one time. It's happened like a few times actually. I'm exchanging footlocks with people, which is always like if this were striking, it's kind of like standing in front of your opponent and exchanging blows. Yeah. I'm trying something new, and I instead of like defending the footlock, I insist on footlocking the guy, and he footlocks me first. Yeah. That happens, but it's different because that's not me in competition mode. Right. Because there's a difference. In competition mode, I wouldn't exchange footlocks with the guy because unless I was in a situation where only I could footlock him, if I felt that risk of being in a 50-50 exchange, I don't like those odds. I don't like 50-50 odds. So I would go somewhere else where I feel I'd be more dominant.
After you've been tapped, even in those scenarios, you basically just go off on the guy and like, okay, I'm going to tap him. A tap clinic. Do you have that mindset of like, okay, even if he kind of gets lucky or you're playing around, do you just go like, all right, I'm gonna tap him a bunch of times, just a reminder.
Only if he's getting an attitude. If for example, if I'm training with someone and they score a point, you can see they get a little, or if they, sometimes people they go and tell other people, hey, I passed Rob's guard today, and then I feel they need a beat, and then I'll make them tap 100 times just so they know, like, look, that was me playing around with you. I wasn't going hard, sometimes it doesn't happen in the gym a lot. It happens a lot when I go for seminars, unfortunately. And this is like one of the hardest things about
And,
teaching.
and when you go for seminars too, you're drained at the
Oh,
trip
dude,
over.
don't-
You get off the plane, you go
'Cause
there.
they don't know you, so you get
Yeah.
this. You get like sometimes you're jet lagged. You haven't eaten. You haven't slept.
Yep.
And you go from the airport straight to the gym to teach a seminar, and there's a line of like,
And they want to roll with you.
oh, they want a piece of you. That's their Abu Dhabi. That's their world championship. Right? They're never going to compete. But if they can tap you, they're going to tell all their friends, like, why bother competing? It's like their coward way out saying, why I don't have to compete. I already
Putting
beat
it on
the
the
champ.
line instead of putting it on the line.
It's a very, you have to work your steps. It's like training with a UFC champion and, knocking him out in practice versus being the champion. It's not the same thing. They're not, it's
Well,
not
going
the
through
same
the fire,
thing.
going through the fire to get
It's
it.
not the
Yeah.
same thing. They're very different things. But for some people, in their minds, in their little pettiness, they go, yeah, it's the same thing. So they'll come at you with a vengeance. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And you're exhausted, and you still got to put it on them. And it's hard. Like I remember, there was this one time where, after being jet lagged, traveling, teaching a seminar, I have to train with 50 people in a row, back to back, and tap every single one of them. And if you don't, they're disappointed.
Yeah.
They're expecting, oh, you're the black belt, you're supposed to be able to tap everyone. I'm like, oh, okay, you guys won. Okay, at the end, like you're like to barely stand up.
Final question. On your reading list, I mean, what are some of the best books you've read for maybe business, for inspiration, for motivation? What are some of the materials you've read and that you would
I
recommend?
read a whole bunch of stuff on business. Like, that's the classic would be Art of War. Like, that's good for strategy in
You
general.
mentioned that earlier.
I don't know much about business. I think motivation. I always like Nietzsche for motivation. I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but like I think he's got some. I think he's like I think he's the philosopher for fighters. If a fighter had to choose, because he's the philosopher of tough love. If something's difficult, you should embrace it. You shouldn't run from it. And I think that a lot of people, they want the easy way. They want the perks, but they don't want to put in the work. That's like the problem with Facebook. They want to brag.
Perk without work.
Yeah,
Or no,
exactly.
something. You can play with that.
Yeah, but that's
Perk minus the work.
Exactly. And I think that his way of looking at something is to go, like, the harder it is, the more you grow from it. What doesn't kill you makes you strong. That's kind of like, they never said that, but that's in a nutshell. That's his philosophy, and I think that's a right mindset for fighters. It's like the military discipline. If it's really hard, you will improve from it. So you should be glad to have a problem, because it's going to make you better. Versus, oh, I have a problem, I'm going to run the opposite direction. You don't improve. So I like that aspect, and to me that motivates me. I'm not not something I always do, but generally speaking, if there's something hard, for example, someone I can't beat, I've always done that in the gyms. This is one thing I've always done since day one. If there was the best guy in the gym, I'd always want to, like, that was my standard right there. Who's the best guy in the gym? And I had to beat him. And I couldn't sleep at night if there was someone better than me in the gym. Like, that bugs me. I know there are guys out there that could tell me, but it bugs me. I'm not happy about it. And if they were in the gym every day, you bet your butt I'd be training with that person every single day until I turned it around. That, to me, that's important. I think that's one way of, you see someone, instead of going, oh, I don't want to train with that guy, he beats me. That's the person you got to train with. He's the one who's gonna teach you the most.
Robert, thank you so much, man. Great interview. It's
Awesome.
always it's a privilege, man. Good stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Frank. It's a pleasure,
brother.
man. Thank you guys.
Good stuff, man. So I'm going to transcribe that. It's going to take me a little bit. I hope to have it up by the end of this week. I'll